Part 2, rational imbalance. Now with that in mind, let's now shift gears a bit and consider what's left of our traditional market. The actual buying and selling of raw materials, consumer goods, labor, the seeking of cost efficiency, and essentially the overall interplay inherent in the competitive system, theorized, of course, as the free market. Still considering this theme of behavior, though. As a brief aside, I'm well aware that there's a huge subculture that would complain that the world today does not operate at all with respect to true free market principles as per the laissez-faire ideal of a completely unregulated market. Free market is defined as an economic system in which prices and wages are determined by unrestricted competition between businesses without government regulation or fear of monopolies. And in the context of this accepted definition, they are correct. This theory holds true, but let's be realistic, shall we? Saying the free market is unrestricted competition between businesses without government regulation or fear of monopolies is like saying ultimate fighting is defined as unrestricted fighting techniques except for biting, eye-poking, and groin-kicking. The truth of the matter is that there has never been and there never will be a free market by this idealized definition because it is underscored by one massive continuum fallacy, drawing lines that don't actually exist morally, which make it functionally impossible. A continuum fallacy is the acknowledgement that two states or conditions cannot be considered distinct because between them there exists a continuum of states. And as per my usage, the continuum is linked to the principle of open, free competition, and any lines drawn with respect to where competition starts and ends in free exchange is absolutely arbitrary. While it is perfectly acceptable to create a car, advertise it, price it competitively against other producers in the interest to strategically take market share from your competitors in your genre through differential advantage and the like, apparently, according to free market purists, to create a car, create a political lobby to finance the favoring of that manufacturer in the international arena by some means, enabling differential advantage through a government-sanctioned export monopoly that restricts other producers is not okay. But wait, if the free market says that we should be free to buy, sell, and compete without regulation, then why can't I buy legislation to assist my purpose of competitive advantage? And if you're one of those people that says that the problem is simply because the state exists at all, well, I have one word for you: mafia. We have had many, many centuries of so-called criminal muscle forcing their commercial will through violence and coercion. How do we resolve such a clear and present propensity? Well, I guess we could make rules or laws that deter such behavior through punishment, right? But who's going to enforce those laws? The state? And of course, you could be like Milton Friedman and declare government should be a referee, not an active player. But again, aren't we forgetting that government actually is a business? And since the very start of its inception, it has derived its membership from the pecuniary or business culture almost explicitly. Saying government is simply not to get involved when the underlying ethos and overall interaction is exactly the same as a company, as the interests of those that comprise the government come from that same genre, it's like telling a hungry dog not to eat your food when you leave the room, even though it's sitting directly in front of him. So I really hope, and I hate to drill this in, but many well-meaning activists out there, I know it's not in this culture, but those who watch this, that still believe this, they begin to get past this idea. And what I want to do further in this section is to show that even if you had a theorized pure free market with such high moral integrity of the population, meaning that they really did stop collusion, they wouldn't allow state interference, they wouldn't use the state for any purposes of such, and they forced a total market arena of pure competition in a strict game board structure, the idea that the system would actually result in ethical results, as per our most commonly, again, assumed assumptions of ethics, or any form of equilibrium, meaning eliminating inequity or full employment or fair and balanced wage spectrums, this is also provably false. And the reason for this, as I will explain, no matter how ethical or humane or eco-friendly you think you are being, the market's central behavioral reinforcers Its core game mechanisms, going back to the stock market and what it rewards, will always create a larger order climate of deprivation, the desperation of it to the effect that we cannot be stable because it's always moving things around in the sense of moving poverty around, moving in this imbalance of suffering around in different ways, as I'm going to explain. And the forces predictably bend the threshold of the idea of ethical greatly by traditional standards. So to say it this way, the problem isn't ethics at all. The problem is this rational choice mechanism that dictates the necessary gaming strategy, something that I'm going to reduce to the term competitive self-regulation. I define competitive self-regulation as the causal, resulting, and adaptive mechanism that guides and shifts rational decisions based upon the logic of seeking and maintaining success in the marketplace. It is the same mechanism praised by the Chicago Austrian schools, the Ayn Rand acolytes, and many other market schools who also claim that a pure free market will simply not allow monopoly, cartel, and power consolidation. As I will explain, this mechanism, competitive self-regulation, is inherently myopic, too truncated in what it is capable of facilitating to create any type of true social balance. It can't see it. It just keeps moving the problems around in a massive chain reaction as the game unfolds. So I want to begin this explanation with a very generalized example to drill this home. Meet Jeff. He owns a t-shirt store. He also has great faith in the free market. He orients his actions based around the mechanisms of this competitive self-regulation, meaning again, as per the theory of a true free market, this regulation is not legislated by some power. It is considered built into the market's defining logic, coming from the mutual competitive interest inherent in the entire aspect, everyone fighting at once. Jeff needs inventory, so he purchases his shirts at bulk rates with his decision on what to buy, price-wise, based on the price competition coming from other t-shirt stores in his region, assuring, of course, his customer satisfaction as best he can by a competitive association. Likewise, he has about 5 employees, which he honestly cares about. He hangs out with their families. He wants nothing more than to see them be well. He drives their pay competitively, of course, to assure that they do not find a better wage at another store and leave, while also knowing he has to keep a viable margin to support his business overall. Jeff is also socially conscious in the traditional sense. He is aware of problems with pollution, resource overshoot, and common environmental issues on the planet, and considers himself eco-friendly, doing his best to be earth-friendly. He recycles religiously, he even rides his bike to work every day to help try and reduce CO2 pollution. Now let's assume everyone in the world had Jeff's mindset, 7.3 billion Jeffs, which believed again in the market as the director, the orienter of proper societal action through the free system, through free enterprise and competition, through the pursuit of profit. They're not being greedy. They're not being corrupt in any traditional sense that we tend to define it. In this case, would it work out? What would the end result be? Would the global market achieve full employment, humane working conditions, a relatively high standard of living, and a generally balanced and equitable society? Well, a logician would tell you that you have to model it axiomatically, setting the market parameters in motion to see how the equation finds results. And I'm sure there are plenty of utilitarian game theory equations out there that have tried to do this, to prove in effect how the invisible hand of Adam Smith would actually unfold. However, as I will explain, this isn't actually needed in order to infer a highly probable expected result. All you need to understand is that the market's vocabulary, again, is simply too limited to account for the vast range of offsetting externalities that result as either a natural byproduct of the mechanistic logic inherent or as a result of something completely unrelated or unforeseen. And those results invariably create a survival deficiency in some way, a deficiency which puts pressure on the individual, desperation, or on a company to rationally reduce their ethical and moral standards in order to overcome the deficiency at hand. Deprivation, natural disasters, resource overshoot, scarcity, pollution, homelessness, disability, species extinction, climate destabilization. I think we all know what externalities are. And they are simply unrecognized. Why? Because the market cannot rationalize anything that can't be turned over through money. and it certainly can't rationalize anything that has an interest to slow consumption. The result is an ever-mutating chain reaction each time one of these issues arises, interfering with the so-called market efficiency as it sends a shockwave through the system, altering behavior, if you can visualize this. This is why when you back any market economist into a corner on the issue, all they can resort to is one solution: charity and volunteering to solve external problems. They have no other rational option, as the market game can only service things that enable financial exchange again. And if that isn't available, it won't happen. The best way to demonstrate this is to continue my example. As stated, Jeff purchases his shirt inventory at bulk rates based upon staying price competitive with other shirt stores in town, assuring satisfaction by competitive association. So two questions arise. What is the ethical integrity of his labor, or the labor of the shirts, I should say, and what is the ethical integrity of the materials? With respect to labor, it just so happens that a few years back, a typhoon hit the coast of Thailand, damaging its industries. Now, with limited means to keep money flowing in the local economy, and with little to no help from any financial establishment, since again, state intervention is deemed an interference in this world, a Western company, which consequently has had massive losses, due to a lawsuit, losing lots of money, they decide to offer contracts to this vulnerable society to manufacture clothes. And the only way this company can stay afloat is to offer 12 cents an hour for a 10-hour workday. This community in Thailand, of course, has no other recourse due to their misfortune, so they voluntarily agree to accept these low wages. Again, there's no internal state intervention or regulations to assure healthy conditions of the factory, and the market, in its most pure form, only sees competitive cost efficiency in that scenario. The results are, of course, poor conditions, poor health for the workers in the community who are barely able to survive on the wages in general. Back to the hiring company again, we don't want to demonize them. Are they being exploitative? Actually, no, it's not an issue of greed. They are trying to recover from a major lawsuit, an externality once again, like the typhoon, and they're short on funds, and they're backed into a corner, and they have 500 employees to feed. Then there are the shirt's materials, and let's assume cotton. As some may know, in reality, the United States still dominates the cotton market globally. And any of you who have clothes, say, made in China, odds are that cotton actually came from the United States. So as it turns out, the shirts from Jeff's store are not only being made by sweatshop labor in Thailand, by desperate people who have no recourse but to submit voluntarily to work for very poor wages. The cotton they are using was brought in on a shipping container coming from the US, traveling over 9,000 miles, one way by combustion power. As it turns out, in reality, one of those shipping containers, on average, has been found to pollute as much as 50 million oil-powered cars in 1 year. Why aren't US companies just making these shirts themselves since they have the cotton, perhaps even alleviating the growing unemployment epidemic? Well, because again, as per the laws of market efficiency, the competitive self-regulation, the same mechanism that generates the savings appreciated by Jeff's t-shirt consumers, it is cheaper to ship cotton 9,000 miles away, burning an enormous amount of fuel and damaging the environment greatly, have it made by slave labor, essentially, sent all the way back to Jeff in the United States. And the logic perfectly follows the standards set by free market principles. Then there are Jeff's employees. It just so happens that Jeff lives in a town where unemployment has been growing, mainly due to the automotive manufacturing that used to be there, once the pillar of employment in his region. And it has been either moved overseas or it's been replaced by machines through mechanization. The factory dropped from 500 people to, say, 30 people. The intention of that circumstance equally follows the laws of the market because of cost efficiency. Exporting the labor or using automation is cheaper. In this climate, the cost of labor, it has been dropping, and now there's a labor surplus in town, in Jeff's town. This translates into a loss of purchasing power as well, with fewer people in his town buying things. And consequently, Jeff then starts to notice his competitors reducing their paid wages and reducing their t-shirt costs as a result as well, forcing, guess what? Him to do the same in order to survive and keep up. Since people will work for less and less, workers also have no recourse but to submit to these lower wages to feed their families if they can at all. Suddenly, Jeff finds that he's paying base wages to his employees, which he cares about. Some of these people have college debt, some have medical costs, they're taking care of sick parents. Jeff's doing the best he can, even though the quality of the life of his employees have dropped to subsistence. Now, as you can imagine, in this broad hypothetical, I could continue this example in many, many causal directions, but I think you get the point. At no time is anything in play except the dynamics of the market as it is theorized by its proponents. And what disturbs this balance is anything that begins the trend, essentially, of deprivation, the externalities that it doesn't recognize. So I ask you, can we seriously consider Jeff as being ethical when sweatshop labor is making his shirts? Can we seriously consider Jeff as being eco-friendly when the materials of his shirts are being carted around the world 18,000 miles round trip with one of the most polluting transport mediums in existence? Can we seriously consider Jeff as being humane when he is the proprietor of a store that pays his employees the absolute base wage and they are barely able to meet their needs? Obviously, it's a trick question because it assumes isolated behavior and free will decisions absent external forces and pressures that inhibit and alter our behavior. This is why the idea of voluntary trade is an empirical absurdity. Can Jeff decide not to buy those shirts made by the sweatshop? Let's assume he tried. He bought American-made shirts and it resulted in a 30% markup. This would mean that the consumer would have to have the same ethics as Jeff, right? They'd have to have the green ethic that would say, oh, I'm not going to buy this cheap shirt because I know how it's made and where it came from. I'm going to go to this store over here. So it assumes they're willing to pay up. Yet, in America today, still deemed the highest standard of living first world nation, 50% of all Americans don't have enough in savings to go 3 months without employment. While another study found that the average household debt is about $225,000 now, and many have less than $500 in savings. Do you think the first concern of most of these people is sweatshop slavery? No. Personal survival comes first, needless to say. You see, caring is an inconvenience. If you want to care about the world, you have to have the freedom and the ability to move around in a certain way, the luxury of caring in this system. And have you also noticed, on that note, that all the green products you see in stores, everything that's supposed to actually help health and be sustainable in the environment, are usually 2 to 3 times the price of normal goods? Apparently, you have to be wealthy to be a socially conscious consumer. The bottom line, I'm sorry to run this abstraction into the ground, is that an ethical equilibrium, mathematically impossible. State interference or not. The market simply cannot see or resolve the externalities that occur outside the board game, or even as a result of its own creation. And hence the idea of a clockwork market-oriented, competitive self-regulation, finding equilibrium in wages, employment, and ethical standards is structurally impossible.